We were walking in the footsteps of Elohim just like he was. And then when he had insights, he said, I only say the things I hear my Father saying. We're supposed to be hearing those same words and saying those same things. And Yeshua said, you should be able, you will be, speaking to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and it will be done. Why isn't that happening? Anybody want to take a guess?
Oh, ye of little faith.
Oh, you have little faith. And because we lost our national treasure. So what has faith got to do with the national treasure? The word in Hebrew for faith, the root word is aleph mem nun. Does anybody know how to say that word in English? What was it?
Amen.
Amen, brother! A-M-N. And you know what it means? Read this way. So be it. In other words, it's not a like, I think so. It's this declaration of causing it to be. When Yahweh said, Yehi or, you know what happened? What happened, it says, was Yehi or. So in English, we say, God said, let there be light. And then the next verse says, and there was light. But that's not what it says in Hebrew. What it says in Hebrew is Yehi or. And what happened? Yehi or. In Hebrew, exactly what he said is exactly what happened. In English, he said, let there be. Does that mean let there be? This is a causative action of a hand, and this is to come into existence. Somehow, as it were, the Creator's hand causing it to exist, and this is the word light. And what happened? It doesn't throw it into the past tense. He said, let there be is almost this future projecting, and it was, or and there came to be is like this past tense of a narrative, but in Hebrew it's a whole different sense. He said Yehi, and what happened was Yehi. In Hebrew there's this whole other presence of being, word for word, letter for letter. So if we take a secret code and translate it into another language, you're off the map. By concept, or perhaps even, here, what if part of the secret code was sit down on the seventh day? Indiana Jones said the penitent man should kneel. Whoa, he saved his neck. And Yahweh's treasure map says sit down on the seventh day, and we go, no, I'm going to work on the seventh day, and I'll sit down on the first day. It's all the same. Do you think maybe you stepped off the treasure map trail? Do you think you're going to find the same treasure at the end of that clue? Because after all, a treasure map, like in all three of these, somebody's trying to hide something for a reason. Remember I said at the beginning? It's to keep the infidel, the unworthy, away from receiving the treasure. Well, I've heard it said, our God wouldn't do that. Our God doesn't hide anything. Our God wants everybody to come to know the truth. And so the people who that is their God, well, maybe they're right. I certainly couldn't deny it. I don't know which God that is. I was familiar with a God of that repute years ago, but that's not my Elohim. That's not Yahweh. As a matter of fact, in Daniel 12, verse 4, he sent his right-hand man, or maybe the left-hand man, the other right-hand guy is Yeshua. But anyway, he sent Gavriel, which literally means champion and hero of El, or powerful champion. He sent him to speak to this man Daniel and said, okay, Daniel, here we go. I got a message from on high. This is your job. Hide the words And just like you take this and put a stopper in it, seal up the scroll. Sure looks like something hidden to me. And then he gave a time limit until the time of Kutz. Well, if you don't know what Kutz is, you can invent something. Let's say it's the end of the world. Hey! But what if it's not? You don't know if it's not unless you know how to read the language. So we talked about this the other day. Remember the word Kukdati was right here, and I put a yod, and it means wake up. So hide the words and seal the book until the time somebody wakes up. Well, that means he did hide something. The words themselves have been hidden. Then how can somebody else who's a preacher say, our God doesn't hide things, much less he doesn't hide the words? I got a choice. Do I believe the Elohim who commissioned Gabriel to speak to Daniel and specifically tell him to hide the words, or do I believe some preacher who says, our God doesn't do that? Sounds like two different deities to me. Now I've got a choice. Which one am I going to follow? Which one am I going to believe? And right here, we have a fork in the road. It's not just a minor thing. If this guy says, our God is to take this fork and to run this direction, then wherever that goes is different, a divergent path than if this is the Elohim. The question is, I got a treasure map in here. The question is, how do we know that we have the right interpretation of the signs of the treasure map? Any one clue would throw us off. If the writer of the treasure map was clever, he would put a little thing called fool's gold at the end of that trail. So you go, woohoo, look what we found, hooray, let's stop looking. And you run off and you make an idol, or you set it up on the shelf and you light incense and put little flowers around it. And you always said, that's none of my stuff. See ya. And remember Yeshua said, he's going to say to certain people, I never knew you. And they said, well, we knew you. And he says, sorry, I never knew you. What does that mean? How do you fall into that condition? If Yahweh himself has given us a treasure map, and Yeshua says at the last day, the great divide is going to be those who he knows and those he doesn't know, I would think that something about the destination of this treasure map has to do with not only knowing him, but being known by him. That's got to be the ultimate destination of this treasure map. Because notwithstanding any wisdom you think you might have, or super spiritual powers of driving out demons or healing people, or walking on water even, after all, that's what those people who get cast aside are going to say. Hey, we did stuff in your name. We thought your name was the magic key opening the doors of spiritual blessing, like drinking from the Holy Grail. We cast out demons, we healed people, we preached, we saw manifestations. And he says, I never knew you. So none of those things can be the treasure. They're fool's gold. The only treasure can be Yahweh knowing us. There's something about being conformed to his image by the renewing of our mind. And if Yeshua said, follow me, I'm willing to bet that this is the same trail that Yeshua trod. And he said, hey, you want to get blessed? Follow me. I'll show you the way to navigate this trail. Where? Remember the alphabetic sequence? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey! Vav, Zion. Hey, look. Here's the door, Dalet, to Gimel, back to the Bet house of the Abba Father. So he came all the way down here to grab those who would, to take us back to the Father's house. If that's in the first 6 letters, and if that's the first thing that Yahweh established and set up, I'd be willing to bet that's a pretty good identification of the treasure. The treasure is not drinking out of the Holy Grail. The treasure is sitting at the Father's table, drinking from His. Yeshua said, if any man is thirsty, let him take a drink of this water that I provide for him, and that simple little drink will become a geyser, a fountain, a gusher of living water from deep within him. That was a picture of Memnoon. So here we have Yeshua trying to come down here for a reason. And I mentioned that the letter Dalet was a door of a sort. Speaks of earth. But the interesting thing about the word Dalal, Dalet, Lamed, Lamed, literally means to hang down. If somebody has long hair that hangs down, if somebody has a, here, see this tassel hanging down? That's a Dalal. Is that a door? No, but it's a Dalal, and a Dalet Lamed with a Tav at the end. Dalet Lamed Tav, that's a door. Dalet Lamed is a door. And the way the language works, as I told you before, that if you take the second letter, duplicate it to make it the third, it's essentially the same thing. So how can I say that this is equal to a door? It's part of the riddle of the code. That has to be interpreted so that we don't take the wrong path, we don't lose our head, we don't follow after the fool's gold. Something hanging down. If every letter is Yeshua, as we said before, and that's a key to this code, to this treasure map. Does anybody want to venture a guess of how, like Indiana Jones, like Nicolas Cage, Tom Hanks, pretty smart guys there, good collection of three musketeers of wisdom, but do you think any of them could figure out how a hanging thing is the door back to the Father's house? Anybody want to venture a guess? What do you got?
Provides access to the power.
How does a hanging down thing provide access to power?
Pull on it and the light turns on, the fans turn off.
Well, I'm using this as a model, but if you go back and you look in the dictionary, hey, that's one of the reasons why this dictionary I find is so helpful, is that it also means to drop a bucket down into a well so that you can draw up water. So the picture of dropping something down is the same image as dropping something down. Somebody else had their hand up, yes?
The tzitzits for the commandments.
The zitziot that he says to wear, he said, tie for yourself these fringes, zitzi, is where we get the same word, like the zitzi fly, you know, those little gnats that go, and that when you see it, you'll remember. So I think what happened with those zitziot is he says, listen, I've wired something in your brain. When something catches your attention like, ooh, shiny, sparkly, you go, oh, what's that? And so when we see something fly, we go, what? And he said, put a blue thread there, you'll remember I told you to do some things. So we think, oh, come on, how is a blue thread supposed to remind us to do some things? Because he said so. Just like he said Yehi Or, and what happened is with Yehi Or, when he says, put a blue thread, and when you see it, you'll remember that I told you to do some stuff. So, we tie zitziot, you put in a blue thread, and when you see it, hey, what do you know? You remember to do what he said. And so guess what? A bunch of people had big zitziot with no blue thread. Isn't that like stepping off the path and misinterpreting one of the clues? But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this. Let me give you more clues that are in the dictionary. It means to be impoverished. When you get ripped off on a job or somebody hijacks your bank account like what happened to the other guy, you go, oh man, I mean, you just kind of slump, you kind of hang down, you feel weak, you feel impoverished, you feel lessened. All that is exactly what this word means. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion. Here's this one from the other side of the creation of the heavens and the earth, put himself into some sort of manifest form with a foot to walk the earth, looking like a man who would be put to the weapon, this is also the word for weapon. It's also the number 7, which means vow. So according to some vow, he was going to show man how to go, hey, here's the door to travel back to the house of the Father, but what is this door? The next letter is a het, which is a fence or some enclosure. So you might say that the weapon outside the fence is kind of like a key. Kind of like a key. You know, you stick this in and it opens the thing that's enclosed. But if he came to give man the key to get into this box, you could also read it that he came to give man the key of going back to the door to the Father's house. But he himself said, I am this Dalet. Didn't he say, I'm the Dalet, no one gets to the Father except through me? Does anybody else figure out the riddle yet? Why is something hanging down a clue as to what he meant by he's the door? For this guy, in the infinite eternal realm, before and beyond the temporal existence of this earth and sky universe of matter, he was what? So powerful nobody could touch him. He said his throne is high and lifted up. Insurmountably high is one Hebrew word. Beyond reach. He lowered himself down, being impoverished, weakened, vulnerable. Like you can see a bucket of snakes and you go, hey, you can't touch me, I got you trapped in a bucket. And then you go and you take your hand of flesh and you stick it down in the bucket so they all bite you. That's what he did. He was the bucket lowered down into the well to gather whoever would get in the bucket and be lifted up back to the Father's house. That's the secret of the riddle of the Dalet. When he said, I am the door, he didn't say door, there wasn't an English word. I'm the Dalet. And we talked about yesterday, Ayin Dalet, Ayin Tav, understanding what it means for him to say, I am the Dalet. And people say, God wouldn't do that. Oh, he came down here marching around as God in disguise. If he came down looking like a human, he came down disguised as one who is weak, poor, and impoverished, and subject to beaten. In India, apparently, the Dalal are the lowest caste that everybody hates and despises. He became the lowest to be even hung between two thieves, mocked, ridiculed, punched holes in, drained out, emptied, made void. All that is the word spelled halal. Everything I just said defines the word halal. And in Ezekiel 36:23, he uses that word a few times, that we have desecrated his reputation, his name, among the nations where he sent us. We talked about that yesterday. The point is this. For Yeshua to be the Dalal is this secret code of saying, if he diminished himself to come down here and walk among us, diminished himself from what? From where he came from. Even Nicodemus came up to him and said, we've been watching you. We know you come from Elohim. Because nobody can do what you did except Elohim be with him. And then Yeshua grabbed the conversation and ran with it. John 3:16, talking about being born again, having your eternal life. My point is, even the people on the Sanhedrin, who is we? We know you came from Elohim. So the people that were his contemporaries, according to the highest, the most intelligent of the Yahudim, the rabbis, the sages who studied the words, they know something's going on, but they didn't quite get it. Why? The word Bet Gimel Dalet means to deceive, betray, beguile, to cloak in a garment. This Elohim hides stuff. Even the identity of who he is when he appeared as a man, and how to get back to the Father's house, such that listening to Him is the only way we're going to get back to the Father's house. Let me show you this treasure map. Just for what it is, it's just
Eric, do you need some tape?
Sure. It's not great art, but most treasure maps you think were made on parchment and scrawled by some pirate who was probably illiterate anyway. Originally drew this on handmade paper so that it looked more interesting, but we got a photocopy of it here. So here's the thing about the riddles. This is what I found in the treasure map. Some treasure maps are... Somebody showed me a book of maps that the explorers made in the 1700s. Incredible art. Wood carvings, etchings, and all. And, this isn't that. This will be a whole other study, a whole other, probably a book that I'll try to put together that, explaining these things. But for the sake of the point of this talk, different things are written in Hebrew, and here's the key to the map right here. This is the alphabet. The first 7 letters, like the first 7 days. And then there's Het Tet Yod in one group, Kaf Lamed in another, Mem Nun in another, Samak Ayin Pei, and then Zadi. That's the Mishkan pattern. Those are the teeth on the key. Just like Nicolas Cage had that thing where he had to get the combination just right, and then there was this like a kaleidoscope where he could see where the treasure was. That's the Mishkan pattern. Lining up with Pesach, unleavened bread, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shemini Atzeret. Most people, even the Jews, and most people today that keep the Moedim, consider this is the 7th day of Sukkot, right? This is the last day of the last festival. No, it's not. If you look real close in Leviticus 23, there's a little matter called Shemini Atzeret. The word Shemini means 8, but Shemen means oil. It also means to count and to appraise the value of something. It also can mean grease, like butter or axle grease, or something which is stout, which has some thickness to it. What does that mean? Atzar, Atzeret, means to stop, to restrain, to constrain yourself from what? He said, one more day. Okay, you've had your festivals, you had the 7 days of Sukkot, one more. And you know what we do? That's the day that everybody packs up and skedaddles on. He said, wait a minute, just stop, one more day. But we've been told by some errant route that day just doesn't matter because it's not one of the festivals, and therefore it's just like, well, whatever, it's just the cleanup day. Wait a minute. If there's 7 festivals, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if they say this isn't Shemini Atzeret, how do they get 7? Because they take this festival, Shavuot, and they make it 2. You've got the day that they go out and cut the grain and wave it up, waving the sheaf. 50 days later, you've got Pentecost, where they turn the wheat into loaves, and they wave the loaves. 2 festivals. What I've tried to show you this week in this pattern with the letters Mem Nun, it's 1 festival. 50 days long. What do you do during this festival? You count. Like pregnancy, starts with conception and ends with birthing. The Mem is 40, human gestation is 40 weeks, Nun is number 50, like the word Jubilee, like those are just other things that are within the pattern. But for the people who say that this is 2 festivals, they drop Shemini Atzeret, that changes the pattern of the teeth on the key. And if this is a treasure map loaded with riddles, so those people who don't have the right interpretation of the riddle can't find the treasure, then the significance of talking about this one very matter, which sets up the whole thing, is actually very critical if you want to find the treasure. But the question is, What's the treasure? Does anybody, we kind of talked about it a little bit. Yeshua said, follow me back to the Father's house. Okay, but what is the real treasure? What do you want to guess? If we're in a treasure map, and these 22 letters are the map sequencing of riddles, what is the, here, I'll give you a clue. This is the letter Tav. An X marks the spot. There's the treasure. Where do you start? Guess what? It's not obvious where you start. That's part of the riddle. You can't even get on board unless you know the riddle of the first step. I'll explain why that's the riddle and why he made it that way in a moment. But before we go there, what's the treasure? What is, how would you define the ultimate treasure if we knew Yahweh's language, if we knew his Moedim, and let's suggest, just for the sake of argument, we knew how to pronounce his name, and we knew the right calendar, and we knew when a day started. All right, now we're styling. Okay, but what's the treasure? What's it all for? What is all this stuff about? Anybody got any answers?
A seat at his table.
A seat at his table. Anybody else disagree? Everybody agrees? Does anybody else have a different aspect of that? Huh?
Becoming the bride.
Becoming the bride. Well, you know, I don't know if that's the ultimate treasure or not. I've talked to some people who say, I just want to get in the door. I'll sleep on the floor. I'll be a servant. I'll sweep up after the party if I have to. I just want to be in the door. That's all I care about. I've heard people say that. Being a bride isn't to them necessarily the treasure, but to you, I can understand that you say, man, I want to sit right there next to him, not just sweep up the debris under the table once the feast is over. I want to be like One Night with the King, that movie, where you want to be that one chosen. That's a good aspect of the treasure, but why should he choose you as the bride? Faith? Going back to this word, amen, so be it. If we stick a prefix letter in the dictionary, hey, Aleph Mem Nun, or a suffix letter, Aleph Mem Nun Hey, we'll get two different aspects of the meaning of that word. It does not necessarily just mean to believe something. You know what the motto of the U.S. Marine Corps is?
Semper Fidelis.
Semper Fidelis. And what does that mean?
Always faithful. Always faithful.
Always faithful. Does it mean they always believe?
No, not necessarily.
What does it mean to be faithful?
Be full of faith.
Knowing.
Doing.
Walking one foot after another.
I'm going to look up Aleph Hey, Aleph Mem Nun, or tell you what, Aleph Mem Nun Hey, I'll look that word up. Otherwise we'll burn too much time here and we have a limited amount in front of us. Aleph Mem Nun. This is without the end suffix. Faithfulness. Faithfulness is not believing. The word Aleph Mem Nun is faithfulness. One who is found to be doing what he was told to do. It also means truth. It means certainly. Well, it can mean faith, confidence, and trust, and fidelity, but it means to be firm, to be trustworthy, to be nursed, fostered, brought up, found firm, found to be trustworthy, found to be true, trained and educated, accredited. It means the word for artist, master, and workman. A specialist. You know what that word means? Somebody who listens, reads, goes to school and studies, puts his hand to practicing so much that he's not just an apprentice, but a master craftsman. And this word is used in Genesis where Yahweh says to Abraham, go out and count the stars. And Abraham believed. And so